You have arrived. You are now officially Jedi Masters in Excel, because today we're going to be learning about a very advanced feature called macros. Now, what exactly is a macro? Now, think of Excel kind of like a stenographer in a courtroom. The person sits in the back, they take notes of everything that's going on very meticulously. Now, Excel can do exactly the same thing. Excel can be in the background, watching what you do, taking note of everything, so Excel can repeat the process in less than a second. Something that takes you minutes or even an hour to perform, Excel can do exactly the same thing in less than a second. Pretty cool, huh? Now I know that one day machines are going to take over the world and become Terminators, but for right now, machines work for us. And machines love doing very meticulous things over and over again without any trouble. So let's take advantage of that and learn about scripting. Now, Excel script is called the Visual Basics. You might hear it being referred to as VBA or Visual Basics or the Visual Basic Editor. And what that basically means is the script that Excel is writing to do a very complicated task. By the way, if you're ever in an Excel interview or if you're taking an online test to test your knowledge about Excel, if they ever ask you what is the keyboard shortcut for Visual Basics or VBA, the answer is Alt F11. Even if you don't know too much about VBA, at least know that. It's a very common Excel question and it makes you look good during the interview. Alright, so to get started, let's insert the Developer tab. So up here you'll see the Developer tab. Now if it's not there, unfortunately it will cost you $250 because this is an advanced feature in Excel and I'm kidding. You do not have to pay for this. It's not there by default. If it's not there, we're going to go ahead and insert it together. First, go to your File, then go to Options, then go to Customize Ribbon. On the right-hand side, you'll see the main tabs, and down here you'll see the Developer tab. So go ahead and click the checkbox, and then press OK. By now you should see your Developer tab. Let's go ahead and check it. Now we're going to record our first macro, but before we do, let's talk about relative versus absolute referencing. Now during an interview, they might ask you how much do you know about VBA? And after this lesson, you should be able to answer, well, I know how to record a macro, and I know the difference between absolute and relative referencing. If I was performing an interview, and I asked that question, if the person simply replied, I know how to record a macro, to me that wouldn't be good enough. I would want to look for the person that knew the difference between absolute and relative referencing. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you can really mess things up. There's a reason why the Developer tab is not here by default. I'll show you why later on, but for right now, let's talk about relative versus absolute referencing. Now the way I like to look at it is, absolute referencing is like Excel being a stickler for the rules. I'm sure we've all had friends in school that were kind of a teacher's pet or a suck up, and they were really big on the rules. They followed the rules to a T. So imagine if you were doing something in Excel and someone was behind you writing down everything you did, and they were using this over here, the name box. Every time you click somewhere, he said, okay, now he's in F4. You click somewhere else, he says, okay, now he's in K3. That is absolute referencing, and that's there by default. If you start recording a macro by default, it will be an absolute referencing. If you want to toggle to relative referencing, go ahead and click on Use Relative References. It'll highlight it gray, and then you can continue on with relative referencing. Now what relative referencing does is it's a little bit more lenient. It's more relative. So when you start recording a macro, Excel will be in the background being a stickler, but once you click on relative referencing, instead of looking at this name box over here, H1, it'll say, okay, he's on the selected cell. Then if you go right, it says, okay, now he's on the cell to the right of it. Let's go to our first macro sheet. Let me zoom in some. Alt, W, G. There we go. Let's go to the right some. Perfect. Now let's record our very first macro. Let's go to the Developer tab. We're going to click on Record Macro. We're going to call it Copy. Press OK. So now we are in absolute referencing by default. If I click over here, it's going to say, okay, now he's in 08. I'm going to click on 011. So now it's going to write that down in the background. In fact, let me go ahead and pull the Visual Basic Editor up. Okay, so now I'm in the first module. So right now, it's writing down everything that I do. I'm going to go ahead and press Windows left arrow key. So now it says, okay, now he's in 010. I'm going to click down here. It says, okay, he's in 011. So it's writing down everything that I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and press Control C. So it says, okay, now he's copied it. I'm going to go to the right. I'm going to press Control V. I was going to say, okay, now he's pasted it. I'm going to press Escape. And then I'm going to stop my macro. Stop recording. In fact, I'm going to expand this just so you can see stop recording. There we go. So now you can see it's copied this cell, it's pasted it to the cell to the right. Now let's see if that works on this word good. First I'm going to delete this. Click over here. Let's go to our macros that we just recorded, copy, and let's run this. That was weird. Now why did it do that? I wanted it to copy this and paste it to the cell to the right, but I was using absolute referencing instead of this relative referencing. So when it was in absolute referencing, it was saying, okay, go to 011, copy that, then pasted it in P11. But I actually didn't want that. I wanted a macro that copied whatever I happened to be referencing and then pasted it to the right. So let's use relative referencing this time. I'm going to go here, I press record macro. I'm going to call this copy relative. Press OK. So now I'm recording, Excel's in the background, but this time I'm going to click on use relative referencing. So I'm going to press Control C for copy, go to the right, Control V for paste, press escape, and I'm done. I'm going to click on this again. Alright, so let's try our new macro on this word good. Macros, select copy relative, and run. And look at that. It copied the selected cell, pasted it to the right. I can do the same thing here again. Macros, copy relative, run, and it's working just fine. Go ahead and delete these. Alright, so now let's press Alt, W, and J, I believe. Yep, there we go. Press Control Home. So now Michael Scott has some more worksheets for us to work on. It's more data. Some of these have more columns, some of them have less. But for right now, he wants the row headers to be bold. He wants these delivery dates to look like dates. And he also wants a count of how many records there are. So let's see what we can do. Let's go to our Developer tab. Let's go ahead and press Record Macro. Now anytime you see a very redundant task, something that needs to be done over and over again, macros should be screaming in your head, use macros! Because that's what machines are there for. So let's call this format. Now you can also use a shortcut key. If I were to press L or K or something like that, then to run the macro I could simply press Control plus whatever. But do be careful because there are quite a few shortcut keys and you don't want to overwrite any of them by a macro. You can either go here to run the macro, or you can go to the Visual Basic Editor and run it from there. But for right now, we're going to leave this blank. You also have the option to store this in our current worksheet or a new workbook. Now let's press OK. So now we're recording. Let's press Control Home. Even if I was already at home in A1, I still would have pressed Control Home just in case we were in a different cell when we first started. So now we're home, let's press Control Shift right arrow key to select the headers. Let's press Control B for bold. Left arrow key. Let's go over here to the delivery dates. Control Shift down. Control 1 to get out the format cells. Format this as a date. Press OK. Use the right arrow keys to go over to the order dates. Control Shift down. Control 1. The more you do these shortcut keys, the easier they'll be in the long run. So dates, press OK. We're up, let's press Control right arrow key. Let's go over 2 cells and let's type in number of orders. Go down. Let's do equals count A. Press tab. Then we're going to do column A. Just A colon A. So that selects the entire column. And enter. 1297. In fact, we're going to go column A minus 1. Because we actually don't want to count the headers. Press OK. So 1296 records. Press stop recording. There we go. Now let's go over to this second sheet. Press Control Home. You notice this one actually has less records than the previous. This one has 935, well actually 934, not including the headers. So this should give us a different number. So let's go to our macros, go to Format, and let's run this. Let's see, the first row is bold. These delivery dates look pretty good. The order dates look good. And oh, this column over here, apparently we have overwritten a few cells. That's not what we want. So, no problem. Let's press Ctrl Z. Ooh. You see, that's the dangers with using macros, is that you cannot Ctrl Z your way out. You can't simply step back and say, nope, that didn't happen. No, once you run a macro, it is done, which is why the developer tab is not here by default. Now I made a third one just to kind of show you what the dangers can be with this one. So let's go ahead and record our macro properly. First I'm going to undo everything I did here, but I'm going to do it very fast. There we go. Let's go ahead and record another macro, but this time we're going to toggle between absolute and relative referencing. Let's see what that looks like. Let's record a macro. Let's call it Format, Relative, and Absolute. Press OK. Now we're recording. Let's press Control Home, Control Shift right arrow, Control B for bold. Use the left arrow key, the right arrow key. Let's go down. Control 1. Change it to a date. Press OK. Let's go to the right. Control Shift down. Control 1. Change that to a date. Click the Enter button for OK. Now let's go up. Now we're going to use relative referencing. I'm going to click on this. I'll press Control right arrow key. So now it goes all the way to the right of the dataset. By the way, if I was in absolute referencing, I could still do that. I could press the Control right arrow key. It would go all the way to the right. In the VBA script, it would say go all the way to the right of the dataset. But now I'm going to go over 2 more cells. So now in relative referencing, it says go all the way to the right of the dataset plus 2 cells. If I was in absolute referencing like I was before, it would say, okay, go all the way to the right of the dataset, then go to P1, then go to Q1. Well, I don't want that because, like in the other 2 worksheets, there might be more columns. So I want to be in relative referencing, saying go all the way to the right plus 2 cells. So that's right. Let's do number of orders. The one below it. Use count A. Tab. Now since I'm in relative referencing, it's actually going to say go over however many cells this is and then reference that entire column. So in the other cells, I think the other worksheets, it's 2 columns extra, so it will probably reference column C, but that's actually fine because it'll be the same number of records, but just keep that in mind. Press Enter. Let's click off of relative referencing and stop recording. Alright, let's go to our third worksheet and let's see if this macro will run properly. So macros, format, relative, and absolute. Let's run it. Okay, let's double click this. And what do you know? So these are bold, these dates are formatted properly. And over here, we have this many number of records. 792, is that correct? Let's press Control down. 1792. Actually, in this one, I did forget, when I recorded the macro, I did forget to do the -1, but that's okay. but you can see the power of macros. If you don't understand everything right now, don't worry, you're not alone. This is just to kind of get your feet wet and just to show you the possibilities of what can be done with the power of macros. If you're still confused about what a macro is, I encourage you to go ahead and rewatch this lesson to kind of let it sink in. It took me a few times to understand. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you again in the next lesson.